Welcome to the Birdhouse podcast, where we talk about how to build a business, how to become a better version of ourselves, while we strive to fly up to the higher skies. My name is Alexander Guller, the CEO of the Birdhouse Agency, and I'm your host for this podcast. Welcome to the Birdhouse. Welcome to the Birdhouse podcast. My name is Alexander Guller, and today with me I have Stephen Wynne. And as you know, everyone's talking about it, Ukraine and Russia, which is a big trend nowadays and a big topic for many newsletters and all the people around the globe. So, just to give you some more information, one of the past few weeks, Russia invaded Ukraine. And now, since it's just an unprovoked attack and so on, the whole world is kind of uniting against Russia. And SWIFT is calling out Russia, which SWIFT is one of the things that make communications and bank transactions between different banks abroad and international is making it quite hard. So a lot of the world is going against Russia.
Russia is going against Russia.
Oh yeah, Russians are going. Like also with the, you have never heard about demonstrants, Protestants, not Protestants, but protests.
Yeah,
in Russia. And
Protestants and protests are very different things.
Yeah, very different things. We have never heard as much about protests in Russia because the Russian government has been very good to close it down. But nowadays, Russians are protesting against Putin and so on. So
yeah, I'm waiting for a coup to happen and just Putin gotten taken out. I know there's been 4 or 5 different assassination attempts and all that he's heard about for whatever reason, but
I think the situation is Putin did not do his homework on this invasion. He did not do the preparations at all. Because if you just look at the sheer force of the Russian military, it overpowers the Ukrainian defenses by a whole fucking lot.
The one problem is with all the embargoes going on, there's not enough resources to run their army.
Yeah.
Gas.
Yeah, really. But if the Russian government were efficient in what they were in the invasion, if they were actually planning for an invasion, they would be so much more efficient than taking a 2 weeks war.
Yeah.
They have been slow to push into.
Should have been maybe a week, to be honest.
Yeah.
There's so much power.
The sheer force is so overwhelming that they should have already overtaken Ukraine. But damn, mate, the Ukrainians are fighting like mad. They're freaking lions.
What's funny is, do you know how the Ukraine president became in power?
Well, by election.
How he became president of Ukraine. Him and Putin actually have similar backgrounds. They were both actors, and have very similar stories to power. But the Ukraine president is being smart about it and is a good leader, and Putin is not. And so they were both actors. Ukraine president actually was acting as a president in a show, and a bunch of people said, "Oh, you should actually run for president." And so eventually he did. And with that, then he became president. And he's showing the world how an actual leader should be. He's a president fighting on the front line and not leaving his people. Unlike a certain someone in the U.S. that would not do that. He's also frail. But he would not put himself in any danger for it.
Yeah, and I also think Zelensky, he's staying on it. He's taking photographs of where he is. He is fighting But,
Mhm.
and just a quick note on that, he was an actor before. Like he actually did an ad before he became the president of where they made fun of the Merkel, Germany Merkel, calling the
Mhm.
Ukrainian government and saying, "Oh, hey, oh, congrats, you have been officially accepted into the Euro, EU."
Mhm.
But and he was like, "Oh yeah, thank you. I know that the Ukrainian are very, very glad for this information." And Merkel is like, "Oh wait, is this Ukrainian? Oh, I thought it was Hungary."
That's funny.
Yeah,
Yeah, hasn't the application been sent for Ukraine to go into the EU, but hasn't been accepted yet? Something like that.
it hasn't been accepted yet, but it has been sent.
Yeah,
And also
yeah.
I don't know if you have seen it, but
Because I know they're not in NATO as well,
yeah,
but
they're not in NATO. And I think one of the things, the reasons why Putin is, well, one of the things he wants us to do is make sure that Ukrainian didn't go into NATO. But
yeah,
Zelensky and a whole lot of Ukrainian politicians, when in the FN, the UN, um, they got a standing ovation. Like everybody in Brussels was standing up and clapping
mhm,
because of the way and how they're handling the situation, and also like staying in Ukrainian and fighting and so on. And you can also
yeah,
find pictures of the Ukrainian first lady handing over food to volunteers. So they're staying and fighting.
yeah. They're saying screw the norm of mobility and power, and hey, I'm leading from the front instead of just sitting back and pointing you in the right direction.
Yeah,
Um, And like with that, I think again, like the smart thing again with Russia of not having them in the EU or NATO yet is if you attack that, you'd have half of the probably like I can't remember the exact percentages, but a huge percentage of the world's military turning on you instantly.
mm,
And I think with like I'm going to use like the U.S. as an example. Like we're fighting it through more economic power now, which I think that's a direct thing from Trump, but that's a whole nother conversation. Um, but like we're doing embargoes, we're doing basically anything we can to stop Russia with the like economically, rather than just stomping our foot into the ground, even though we could easily take over Russia just from the mass power we have over any other nation here. Which I think is a smart thing to do because I don't think we need a World War III.
yeah,
And also, U.S. citizens are freaking out that there's going to be a draft. There isn't going to be a draft. We already have more than enough soldiers, and anyone who's not in the military, 78 to 80% of people aren't eligible because of either doing drugs or medicines or health reasons or whatever. So even if there was a draft, 80% of people underneath the age of like 28 can't even be drafted.
I did not know those statistics.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And it's like me, I've thought about going in the military, but I have asthma, I've had too many concussions, so on and so forth. Just a laundry list of health reasons that I can't do it.
Yeah,
Um,
like your health journalist long.
yeah. And I would rather, like, for me, it's like, okay, I like if I went into the military, I'd have to go into some technical support for it. But like, and I'm betting in wartime they'd probably make an exception and all that. But it's just like, okay, like, and I'm a what's considered like a good person in society and all that, and yet I can't be a part of the military.
Yeah.
And so, yeah,
Well, back to the World War III thing. I also think, like as I explained earlier, right now I'm also listening to a podcast with John B. Peterson and and a person who is an expert on Russian warfare and history and so on. And that's actually a really, really good podcast. I would really recommend everybody who's interested in this topic to listen to that because it gives so much informational background and also religious background and so on. But well, one of the things that they talk about in that podcast is we always talk about the nuclear war, like the Russians have nuclear weapons, and the thing is, they don't think that Russia is going to press on the red button and firing nuclear weapons, and as long as we don't put them into a corner where it's like fight or
that's their only
Russia
option.
dies, yeah. As long as we don't press them into like it's Russia that dies or wins, like as long as they're not put in that specific corner, they are not going to do a nuclear warfare. So I really hope that is true, because I don't want a nuclear warfare, and I also think it's
The number one fighting battleground is going to be Europe rather than Asia.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. So I think one of the reasons why a lot of other nations don't send soldiers to Ukraine and don't attack Russia is because if we put Russia into the corner like that, they are going to be like, okay, if we're going to lose, we can just take you with us, and we press all the buttons and boom, 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 catastrophe.
Mm-hmm.
So I think as long as we don't attack Russia and try to take over Russia, I think the nuclear scenario is very unlikely. So I really hope that.
Yeah, I don't think it'll go into nuclear warfare, because then that'd be nuclear fallout. Especially depending if you're like what type of nuclear bomb, whether it's fusion or fission. Because they both have different zones of radiation and all of that, and with Ukraine and Chernobyl and all of that, like just hitting that and making that radiation spread would not be a pleasant event.
And also, like radiation, the lucky if you're bombed by a nuclear weapon, if you're lucky, you're dead in the blast. That's the best scenario. Yeah. Because if you survive, you are hit by so much radiation that it's going to affect you, your children, your children's children, and your children's children's children's, and so on. It's going to affect the whole bloodline of your family, and so on.
Yeah. Yeah, and if that does happen, it's just going to be a catastrophic famines and all that, because food's not going to be safe to eat. And where they're going to target is not necessarily the civilian population. It's going to be the manufacturing the supplies to the civilians.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, and just like with all the nuclear testing and Hiroshima and Nagasaki and all that, it's like, yeah, that is not a pleasant recovery from that.
No, and it really isn't. And like, actually, here in Denmark, we don't have nuclear power. But one of I think I'm for nuclear power, and one of the funny jokes I always bring up when I talk about that is because Denmark is a quite small country, you know, and so nowadays nuclear facilities are so protective and secure that probably one of the only things that can actually like break a nuclear facility is a nuclear weapon. So if we have a nuclear facility that provides electricity and so on, the only reason that, like, if that is going to be destroyed and we're going to be at fault, we are already getting the new radiation from the nuclear bomb. So if we are getting screwed, why not just be double screwed?
Yeah, and my thing with it is the compared to other forms of energy, including green energy, nuclear energy is the least amount of like cubic waste for anyone, because it's like there's a couple centimeters for a human of nuclear waste versus like if you do a coal power plant, an oil power plant. Even solar, because solar panels aren't reusable. Once and to make solar panels, you're using fossil fuel. and you can't recycle any of it because of the way it's manufactured. And so it's actually not clean energy. But that's a whole nother topic. But it's like the amount of waste is so much greater, and with millions and millions of people, that adds up. And I'd rather have a nuclear waste option than a multi-cubic meter of waste per human.
Yeah, and also like as you so certainly speak, nuclear waste is so small. Like
Yeah,
there's
and
no
like
comparison.
I have friends whose parents are engineers at nuclear facilities and all of that, and like it's not a huge like issue. It's just as long as you keep those rods regulated, like there's so much power coming off of them that you can power multiple states with them and multiple countries in the Europe with
Oh,
just one.
oh yeah, like if you go to France, France is one of the countries in Europe which is living off of nuclear power. And but the thing is, like the chance of a nuclear power plant to go wrong is very astronomically low. But
Yeah.
if it goes wrong, it goes horribly wrong, and it's not something that we can fix. Like
Which I think that's why so many people are against it, is because they saw Chernobyl do its meltdown.
yeah. But
And there's so many factors that went wrong at Chernobyl that it doesn't really like add up, that there's just one fault after another after another after another, that it wasn't just one thing that went wrong like people think it was.
yeah, and also like but the thing is also like Chernobyl is, I can't remember the exact date, but it was a long time ago. Like we have
It
become
was like
so
1960s, 1970s.
yeah, I think so, yeah. But the thing is, like Chernobyl was, we didn't know enough about radiation and power plants and so on as we know now. So like every nuclear power plant that we build nowadays is so much better and more secure, because like we have extra security measurements. For one thing, we have like one layer of extra security, one extra layer, one extra, and so on. So it's way more secure and way more safe to do it nowadays. And as I said, like if you want to break it, you have to use some heavy artillery, such as a nuclear bomb, nuclear weapon. So if you're already screwed, why not just be double screwed? I just think it's such a fun argument. Sorry.
Yeah, and it's just like, again, it's such a safe option that it really doesn't matter. And the radiation coming from it is almost none because of the safety precautions they do take. And we know so much more about nuclear power because our knowledge literally grows every day with it.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I'm quite interested in is how much of the power supply, where in the next 20 years, where this power supply coming from? Is it coming from solar panels? Is it coming from wave energy? Where does it come from?
Like if you're gonna do renewable energy, I'd much rather do wind. There's so much less waste with it because you can reuse a lot of those parts versus like solar. Like solar is great because like the sun is an infinite power source for us. But the thing is, again, where do you store the energy at night? Batteries. And what are batteries made out of? Acid and stuff that, again, can't be reused once it's completely depleted.
Yeah.
So, like, how do you sustain that? Versus wind, you can have a 24-hour supply because it's just as windy during the day as it is at night. So, yeah.
Yeah, and all of the different power supplies have the different advantages and disadvantages. And one of the things that you just explained is that wind is always on, so to speak. We always have wind. We have, but the sun panels we just get the energy from the day. So
yeah, it's just like Texas ran into that problem last year of not having the green energy because they shut off some coal plants and oil power plants and all of that. And they ran into the power cap. And there was just communities that had to go with no power because like there wasn't enough power in the system, and they isolated themselves. And there's again a lot of different engineering issues with that, but like they ran into their energy cap, which is not a good thing.
Yeah, and that's not good. We rely on energy by a whole fucking lot nowadays.
It's what maintains plumbing. It's what maintains your city. It's what maintains infrastructure. Like there's just so much that it does, and if it goes out, then you're screwed.
Yeah, and that's just the best way to say it. You're screwed. You really are. And also, like I think when we talk about energy and power supply, I also think that is also infrastructure. And some things I'm really curious about is like the next 50 years with the AI and so on. We get so much technological things nowadays that are so unbelievably powerful. I think one of the best things to do right now is make sure that the infrastructure on every part is secure and the best at everything.
The problem is it's never going to be completely secure because no matter what, there's humans involved.
Oh yeah.
But number two is there's been so much technological advancements that we can't keep up with the next technology.
Oh yeah.
Like there's still connections from the 90s, like M.2 slots and all of that. That's on your PC or an really old computer, like keyboard and all of that. And it's like, okay, if you put a direct user input in there, then like any program can get by any security because it thinks that a human's doing it, so it trusts a human inherently. And just things like that, where it's like, okay, we're never going to be secure because we have old standards in there. And it's just like with laws. Like our society is much different than it was 200 years ago when like the Constitution was written. They tried to do it universally, but there's just things that you can't like do. It's like, okay, you never knew that planes were going to be a thing. You never knew that cars were going to be a thing. You never knew that electricity was even going to be a thing when that was written.
Yeah.
And so how do you write a universal law for things coming up? You don't.
Yeah. And that's one of the problems I think we're going to face. Also, like with the NFTs and metaverse and so on, like we don't know how to regulate that. And
they're trying to regulate it, but again, it's the lifelong politicians that are regulating it that don't know anything about it.
Yeah. So just I lost my train of thought there, but I think like the thing is also like we have to keep what's working. So like there's always that discussion about how much of the new and funny and exciting things do we need to do and trust to do. And there's also, no, these things work, let's focus on those. So like the conservative, more liberal, new funny stuff, old works. Where on the spectrum do we need to be at all times?
I'm like, we don't even have our fundamentals. Like on myself, I'm a little more conservative leaning, but I'm also a person that loves new technology. Like my parents, like my dad, he honestly is not the biggest fan of some technologies. He's like, I'm good with about 10 years ago cap on technology and all of that, which is like, okay, fine, great. But for me, I'm like, we don't even have our fundamentals down, like even down to our like power system, our power delivery system in the US. We're already maxing it out and we haven't done maintenance on it enough in the past 20, 30 years to update it. It needs to be replaced every 30 years and we haven't. And we're on its 50-year mark.
Yeah.
And so, like, if we don't have those fundamentals down, how can we continue to grow at this rate if we're already past the cap of the fundamentals. And so I really do think we need to take a step back and reconsider of like, okay, where are we going and how can we make the structure for this to increase? Yeah. And that's not what's being considered. It's just like, okay, here's a new thing. Oh, just make the old thing work and fit in. Make a square thing fit in a round hole. Like, that's kind of what we're doing right now.
Yeah, and when we talk about that, I think about I saw a picture once, which I think it were the person who built the sewers in London. And at the time they built the sewers, they were quite small, like very small. But this guy was like, "Nah, mate, we need to build them." I think it was maybe twice the diameter, or maybe 4 times the diameter. And because he made sure that the fundamentals were so wide, London could expand to the size that it is now.
Yeah, and that's again, a lot of growing cities are running into the infrastructure problem. Like in Kansas City, Kansas and Missouri, there's a $3 trillion infrastructure bill that's just got passed to fix roads, to add infrastructure so that the city can keep growing. Yeah, like it's one of the best cities for traffic, but that's because they've focused on the infrastructure of that. Yeah. Like, of course, there's going to be hot spots, but like, in general, it's a really good city for driving. And that's because they're spending the time and money and planning to do it.
Yeah. And I think that's the difference. Like you really need to focus on making sure that the infrastructure is as good as it can be. Because the thing is, infrastructure helps everybody. Mm-hmm. Because like when nowadays a lot of people, well, there's always been a discussion about the poor and the rich. And like, if you focus on the infrastructure, you help everybody. You raise the standard of the poor. Because like, if you look 50 years ago, nobody had a phone. Now everybody have a phone. Even the poor have a phone. Even the poor have water. Even the poor have food, and so on. Well, most of them. There's some cases.
It's just like in any first world country, the standard of poor is above like almost the rich class in most third world countries. And like that's a good thing. It's not a great thing that everyone doesn't have food and water, but like at the same time, like it's good to have a higher standard of living, and people are looking at the top 1% of the 1% of the 1% and are getting jealous, and you're like, okay, well, you're within the 1% just because you're living in America.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you're top 5% of the world, and you have no idea about it. Like, you're complaining that Elon Musk hasn't paid it taxes, but whenever Trump gave the tax break, he literally paid the most taxes out of anyone. But now, like, they were, like, complaining. It's like, oh, he's only paying an X amount of percentage, but he has so much money. You're like, well, if you raise everyone by like 1%, everyone collected could pay more than he could. And it's just things like that people just don't realize that it's not the rich that's the problem. It's that everyone's not pulling their weight.
Yeah. And also, like, one of the arguments that I really like is the rich makes the economy flow, but also, like, creates jobs.
It's like, I'm going to give a tax break to someone who gives 1,000 people a job more than I am the person that's working the job, because they're not creating anything but a product or a good or a service.
Yeah, the company, the person who leads the company makes the product and sells the product and improves the economy and provides people jobs, which helps the economy flowing and makes sure that everybody eats, and so on. So like just look at Amazon, the second richest guy on the fucking planet. Look at how I don't know the exact number, but like look at how many employees he got. Look at how many employees Elon Musk have. Look at how many employees Starbucks, McDonald's, KFC have, and so on.
Yeah, and so they're gonna get tax breaks because of that, and that's good. It's really not a bad thing, and a lot of people think it is, and I'm like, why? They're creating something so that you can eat.
Yeah.
And if you're not going to give them breaks, it's going to raise the price of everything, which is going to raise your taxes, which is going to raise your cost of living, which is going to lower your standard of living. So why not give a break here so that everyone down the chain can do that? It's just like with a huge debate is raising the minimum wage to $15 in America, and some jobs are not worth $15 an hour. Somebody sweeping at Walmart is not worth $15 an hour. And if you make that the minimum, and yes, the cost of living has gone up over the years, but if you make that the minimum, there's going to be huge inflation, which is going to make everything more expensive, taxes more expensive, housing more expensive, food more expensive, and so on and so forth. And it's just why?
Yeah, and it also goes back to the supply and demand, because if everybody has money, everything keeps going. But if one person only has it out of 100, those things that he has that nobody else has is very expensive, and so on. Mm-hmm. So if you make sure that everybody have everything, so to speak, everything you have to live nowadays, it's just way better.
Yeah.
And I actually wanted to point something out, but I can't. It was such a good thing to say, but to talk about, but I think it escapes my mind at the moment.
That chicken winglets are better than chicken drums.
Yeah. Well, you read my mind, of course. Of course, that it is.
Oh.
That is that. Yes.
Yep.
But I think also, when we talk about the rich and the poor, the rich is the people that are also making innovations.
Mm-hmm.
Look at Amazon, how much innovation he has made in his company.
They've built so much infrastructure that allows people to get stuff in 2 days. That's crazy. Especially in the big country like America, getting any product you want in 2 days is impressive.
Oh yeah, that. So damn good job, Jeff. Good job.
Something that takes me 4 days or 3 to 4 days to drive across America for a certain product, I can get it in 2 days. That's that just does not make sense.
It's so weird. So, and I think that's a good way to start the podcast today. With saying that the rich is the ones that make all the jobs. They are one of the ones that make approximately all of the innovations, and help the poor get richer and make sure that the infrastructure is laid out for everybody, and so on. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Birdhouse Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, follow me on my Instagram @thebirdhouseagency and share it to your friends and family, or rate it on Apple Podcast or Anchor. My name is Alexander Gulager, and I will see you at the next episode.